All right, so as we left off, now we have a very simple control rig for animating a bouncing ball. And again, the idea is that the controls animate the object. The animator does not actually animate the geometry itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to build on top of this with the translational controls. We're going to build on this with rotational controls, because obviously a bouncing ball is going to rotate one way or the other. So again, as we mentioned, we're going to go to an orthographic view. I'm going to make sure that all of my controls are zeroed out. I want to make sure I don't have any sort of offsets in my controls as I'm building my my additional controls. So first thing I'll do is do a ZAxis Control object. So I'm going to go to Create, Curve Tools, actually NURBS Primitives, and I'm going to say Circle. And it created a very small circle there in the middle. I'm going to switch over to my perspective view. And so this is my Z-axis here. So I'm going to rotate this. I'm going to rotate on the X-axis by 90 degrees exactly. And now I'm going to switch back over to front view. Whoops. I obviously did not do that well. All right. Now you can see here's my control object. I'm going to turn on grid snap so that I can make sure that I get it right in the center of the ball. And then I'll turn it off. And then I'm going to scale the control object so that it's just slightly larger than the ball, so that you know, when the animator's animating, they can see it, obviously. So I think that's pretty good. I'm going to make it maybe a little bit bigger. So now the first thing I need to do, now that I've got it in the orientation and the size that I want, I'm going to zero out these channels. So I'm going to go Channel, Freeze, All. And then I'm going to go and rename it. So I'm going to say Control _ rotate _ This is, now it's going to, this control is going to rotate like a steering wheel. And it's going to be rotating, as you can see on this sort of axis gizmo, you can see that it's going to be rotating along the Z-axis. So Control Rotate Z. Then since I've got it pretty much squared away as far as size goes, I'm just going to duplicate it by doing Control D. And then I'm going to rotate it this way along the X-axis. And you can see where it says -79, so I'm just going to say 90, pop. And this is obviously going to control the rotation, the spin, so to speak. So that's going to be along the Y-axis. So I'm going to rename this Control Rotate Y. And now I need the rotational control along the X-axis, which this is kind of a little confusing, but I'll go back over it in a second. So I'm going to duplicate that control again, and you can see it right here. So I have Z, Y. I know this is going to be X. And I'm going to rotate it this way, 90 degrees on the Z-axis. So now you can see I have all of the axes covered. And just to kind of go over why I named them their particular, the way I did as far as the axes goes, whoops. You can see like this control, they all kind of rotate like steering wheels, right? So it's going to rotate, this control is going to rotate this way, which means it's going to rotate around the X-axis. This control is going to rotate this way, which rotates around the Z-axis. And this one is going to rotate this way, or this way obviously, but it's going to be around the Y-axis. So that's why these are named the way that they are. Now if I select them all, actually if I select any of these, you can see, well, with the exception of that one, they all have values in the channels. So I'm going to select all of my controls, and I'm going to say channels freeze all, and then I'm going to select them, make sure they're all zeroed out, which is good. And now, as you know, what we're going to have to do is set up their hierarchy. Well, actually, we can go ahead and do sort of the preliminary setups as well. So we need to limit. We want to make sure that these controls are not supposed to be able to move around like this. You don't want that. So I'm going to select all these controls, and I know the things that I don't want them to do. So I don't want them to translate, I don't want them to scale, and I don't want them to control visibility. So I select these, and hopefully it does them all at the same time. I don't think I've tried this. So I'll hit lock selected. So if I select them all, you can see that they are they're all locked. So this one, I only want to rotate the sorry about that, some dog interference. I only want it to rotate along the Z-axis, so I'm going to shut down the other two axes. I'm going to lock those. This one, I only want to rotate along the X-axis, so I'm going to select the Y and Z and lock those. And then this one, I only want to select along the Y-axis. So I'm going to select the X and Z and lock those as well. So now these things only move in the directions that I want them to do, So now I have to set up the hierarchy here in the outliner. So the question is, like, what order of operations, what makes the most sense? So from my perspective, and this is just me, generally I usually just follow the order of operations for translation, and that's X, Y, and Z. So I'll have X to be the sort of base set of controllers. Then I want the Y to be a child of that, and then Z to be a child of Y. So in the outliner, I'm going to select the Z controller. I'm going to control select the Y, hit P. This is just like what we did with the translate controls. So now you see Y and Z. So now I'm going to select the Y control select the X, hit P. And now when I expand these out, you see X, Y, and Z. So now the next thing is obviously there is the controls don't, one, you can tell by their color that they're not a part of my controls scene layer. So I want to fix that right away. So I'm going to select all of those controls. I'm going to right click, add selected objects. Now everything is yellow, which is good. It's what you want. But you can tell, like, when I move the root, they still don't move with it. So what I need to do is actually now make these controls a part of these control hierarchies. So since we know the root and the translates are kind of the base controls, right? We don't want these to be rotated, because then they wouldn't show what their orientation needs to be all the time. If these rotational controls rotated these, they would no longer be up and down, right? So like if I move this, if I rotated this like 90 degrees, then these controls would end up pointing side to side. So based on that, I know that the rotate controls have to be underneath one of these two control objects. Since we know that the ball has to be controlled by the Y, and we know that the ball also has to be controlled by the rotate controls, I know now that the X needs to be a child of the Y control. The rotate X needs to be a control of the Y, or a child of the Y control. So I'll select the X, control select the Y, hit P, and now you can see if I move the control, everything goes with it. That's a good sign. If I move the up and down, the ball, all the rotational controls go with it, which is good. Now if I'm going to turn on wireframe here. So if I select this, my rotate X control, and I rotate it, whoops, you notice the ball does not go with it. As a matter of fact, as you can tell, even in this hierarchy, anything I move beyond this control will not affect the ball, because the ball is not a child of these. Is not a child in this hierarchy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change that. I know now that the ball will probably need to be a child of the last control object in the chain. So I'm going to select the ball, I'm going to Control Select Z, and I'm going to hit P. So now the ball is the last object in the control series, right? So if I rotate this, now you can see the ball does rotate. It doesn't matter which control, whoops. It doesn't matter which control I move, the ball is always going to go with it. And I'm going to select all my controls and just make sure everything is zeroed out. Whoops, except the scale. And then always go through and just double check. It never hurts to be a little paranoid. All right. So now you have these sort of basic rotational control joints. In the next video, we're going to cover how to make the rotational controls a little bit more explicit as to what their job functions are. That's it.